Hi all. So in the last video, I worked on putting a front buffer beam onto the loco, and I'm now then ready to start painting the frame. I've probably spent more time Googling different products for this than I probably will spend actually painting. It is mixed metals, and every single person you ask has a different opinion on what you can use. Um, and yeah, so it's been just a bit tricky. Just trying to figure out a lot of the recommendations people have been giving me. You can't get those paints anymore. So what I've ended up settling on is Raptor paints. I wanted to spray it because I just have more experience with sprays, and you can get a nice finish with those. And these are something that I could pick up in Halfords fairly cheaply. So there's an etch primer that's heat resistant up to 300 degrees. Now the frames and the wheels don't actually need to be heat resistant, but some of the parts on the loco will need to be, and I like the idea of using the same paint throughout because then I'll get the same finish. So it's a bit overkill this, but still I'll go for it. So there's a grey etch primer, and then I've got the black, flat black to go on top. I didn't like the idea of using like a gloss or anything like that, just because it's a vintage loco, so I don't really want that sort of thing. But both of these, they're both heat resistant. They're both designed for engines. They're engine paint, really. Yeah, it should be able to handle it. We'll see. So what I've done then, I'd already stripped the frames, but I've gone and stripped the wheels as well off camera. I did that off camera because I've already done some videos on stripping paint, and they're not exactly that fun to watch. So yeah, I did that off camera. I did do it slightly differently though. I used cellulose thinners, which which I've never used before. Again, I had to be careful because some people said that you could eat away at the brass parts, but I figured I wasn't going to leave it in there for very long. I thought I'd probably have to soak the parts for about an hour to get the paint off, and I didn't. I put it in a pot, put the wheel in, being really careful to sort of use wire to hold back the axle boxes. And literally within 5 minutes, the paint was falling off. I actually ran it under a tap, and the water was able to just remove the paint. And then I went in with some wire brushes and a nail to get into the fiddly corners where the paint didn't want to come off. And it's ended up really nice, like really, really nice. The paint's come off beautifully. So that was excellent. So yeah, let's crack on with the painting and see how we get on. So I've been reading the instructions, and it tells me to degrease using a cellulose thinner first of all, then to sand it down, then to degrease again, and then to use the primer in 2 separate coats, and then I let that dry. I sand it down again with a different grit sandpaper, and then I'm ready to use the actual main paint again in 2 coats. So it's a fair few steps, but let's crack on and do it. So here I am then using the cellulose thinners again, just a small bit decanted in a pot, just to degrease the part. This is the kind of the major degreasing because it's still been handled quite a bit by this point. I start off by using just a paintbrush, a large paintbrush, and eventually, as you see here, I switched to an old toothbrush, which actually I found worked a lot better. I could really get into the creases and sort of scrub. Now at this point there were still a few bits of paint here and there. It was mostly gone, but actually this step did help remove that as well. And naturally I then go on and do the wheel sets as well, but I won't make you watch all of that. The next step then is to sand the part down. For this, I think I used 180 grit sandpaper. Now I did realise just before I did this that it was a good idea to mask off some of the parts, just to kind of keep all the grit and stuff out of some key parts. So here you can see me masking up, all the axles and things. Now I do actually make a mistake here that becomes apparent a little bit later. I forget to mask
some of the things that I probably should have masked would have made things a bit easier. So all the sliding points, like where the axle boxes actually meet the frames on the horns, that would have been a good idea. But I didn't realise it. It's not a big problem, as you'll see later I solve it, but still, it would have been better if I'd done that at the time. Now I do have a little bit of trouble doing this job because I'm still wearing the gloves, because it does say after degreasing not to handle things too much without gloves on, but the masking tape keeps sticking to my gloves, so I give up in the end and take them off. It gets a second degrease anyway, so I figured, who cares. So here are the final masked up parts. There's a lot of masking tape on these bits. I remember to do the pins on the end, and I ended up doing the axles as well. I wasn't sure if those would be needed. I felt fairly certain I could probably clean them up if they did get paint on them, but I decided for the extra 2 minutes that it took to wrap some tape around them, it wasn't worth not doing. Now I've decided not to mask up the tyres of the wheels. That might prove to be a massive mistake, but there is a reason why I'm not doing it. The actual loco, Invicta, being a really vintage loco, actually has painted, fully painted tyres, wheels, even the tyres. So I kind of want to emulate that. Now I'm pretty certain as soon as I run it on a rail, that paint will wear off pretty much instantly, and that's kind of fine. If we look at this picture of the real loco as it's currently preserved, you can see where the paint has on the real thing worn away, and I kind of like that effect. The other thing is that I actually don't know whether or not this loco will ever run. I'd like it to, but I still don't know whether or not it will. So if it does become a static model, then at least it will look like a nice static model with fully black tyres. So I'm going to paint the wheels entirely black, and if that proves to be a mistake, then so be it. It proves to be a mistake. So here starts literally hours and hours of sanding. I had, for whatever reason, thought that I'll be able to prepare and spray all these parts within a single evening, and it wasn't even close to true. The prep work took forever. I spent an entire evening just sanding down these parts. I'm glad I did it, but it really did take a really long time, and I used an awful lot of sandpaper. So I'll give you a few shots of me, in fast forward sanding things, but I'm not going to give you all of the footage that I took, because that would be ridiculously boring. So that took a lot longer than I thought it would. It was really tedious, but we got there in the end. So all the parts are now sanded and actually looking really nice and shiny. It was actually quite useful doing it under my painter's lamp, because then I could really see when the surfaces were clean. To be honest, I couldn't quite figure out whether or not this process was about cleaning, or whether or not it was about roughing up the surface in order to provide a bit of a key. I honestly wasn't sure, but either way, as I scrubbed, the surface definitely changed and became a lot shinier. It took a long time because there's just so many parts to get to, and obviously, even a rectangular piece has 4 different edges and 2 faces, so it all took a really long time. I went in with some Scotch-Brite as well on the brass parts, just because they were hard to get to with the sandpaper, and I've made a mess on my desk. But we are now ready. So there's a couple of bits I still need to mask, because I realised there were some pins on the frame as well. So I've just got to put some masking tape on those, and then we're ready to clean them up. This time I'm going to use isopropyl alcohol for this. It's fine for like light degreasing, and I've run out of the cellulose thinners, so I sort of have no choice. So yeah, so that's the next job. I have lost the light now though, so I won't be able to do any painting tonight. So that will have to happen in a couple of days' time. For this job, I mostly used cotton buds or Q-tips, dipped in the isopropyl alcohol. I found that I had a lot more control and I could get into a lot of the small areas with this. I was still surprised by the amount of dirt that was coming off bits, particularly here where I was going around the brass horns, and where they're riveted in place. There was a lot of dirt coming out from around those. So I spent an awful lot of time degreasing. One thing I did find using the Q-tips, the cotton buds, is that as soon as they get even slightly dirty, you really see it. So I basically kept going until they were coming out clean. I do eventually switch over to a cloth, again dipped in the isopropyl alcohol, to do kind of the larger wipe down areas. And of course I'm being really careful to make sure I'm wearing gloves during the entire thing. Even the oils on my fingers would potentially cause issues for the paint, so I'm really careful from this point in. So here I'm attaching some wire to the parts so that I can hang them. I don't have a proper painting booth here at home, so I'm just making do with a washing line. But the smaller the contact points, the better. Now, as with all paints, it needs a really good shake, so I spend 2 minutes shaking non-stop. I know this video doesn't show it very well, but I do give it a proper 2 minutes of shaking. And then I'm outside. Now, I did start off originally trying to do this with a cardboard box to try and make a makeshift spraying booth. I was a bit worried about the wind, and in particular like bugs and things. I live near some fields, so I thought horse flies might get stuck to the paint. In the end, it was just proving a nightmare, so I gave up and just held the parts as I sprayed them. Now, I do an awful lot of spray painting myself anyway for my other hobbies, and I've got quite good at it over the years. One thing I find that a lot of people get wrong all of the time is that they try to spray the large flat areas first, and that's not a good idea. Instead, it's always best to try and spray into the fiddly bits first, because a lot of that overspray is going to hit the flat areas anyway, and only once you've got all of the fiddly areas do you then go back and then hit it with hit the flat areas. So I'm just working my way around the parts and getting all those kind of nooks and crannies first, and then going back in and doing the large parts. Now I'm going to do this in 2 coats anyway, because that's what the can recommends. So it's quite thin. It looks like I'm doing a lot of spraying here, but I'm not really. They are short bursts. So yeah. Unlike the other parts, I did find that the main frame for the body was easier hanging it. This is actually the egg chair. I've just taken the egg chair off its frame and I'm just hanging it off that. The wife wasn't particularly impressed with that, but it certainly did a good job. So I'm just hanging it and then working my way around constantly. Again, spraying into the fiddly areas first, and then hitting the larger, flatter areas afterwards. It is a bit hard to get underneath it. It would be a bit nicer if it was a bit higher, but still. And then here are the parts drying on my makeshift dry rack. Now, what wasn't shown in the footage is that I did actually do a second coat, and you end up with these nice primed parts. Okay, so it's all dry now and nearly ready for the top coat. Now, I did do a few things to this, which I've done off screen. The first was I gave it a bit of a scratch test. I noticed that my primer actually isn't an etch primer. It's a bit annoying because I came across it after Googling etch primers, but it doesn't actually say the word etch anywhere on the can, and doing a bit more research, it's not an etch primer. So I'm a bit worried about how this is going to adhere to the surface. But the primer is designed for metals. It's engine paint, and it is pretty tough. So when this was drying, I let it dry for it's 48 hours now. While it was doing that, I for about 12 hours I put it in my printing enclosure, 3D printing enclosure, because it was heated. So it was sort of kind of heated to about 25 degrees for about 12 hours, just because this is engine paint, so it cures with heat. So I didn't want to go crazy with it, but I wondered if that would help. And it is pretty tough, so I've done a bit of a scratch test. So here where the buffer beam will be, where I won't actually see it, I've sort of attacked it quite a bit. And although I can mark it, if I can get to zoom, I can certainly mark it, but I can't get it to... I can't actually take the paint back to metal. There was a bit here, but that was just where there was like a bug or something was stuck, and I peeled that off, so then that's left a bit of raw metal. But like, you can see where I've been attacking it, and I can mark it, but I can't get back to metal. So it certainly seems tough enough. There was another little bit on right on the edge, a tiny little edge. It's not that actually. That is actually filled with paint. That's just a dink in the metal. But there was one of these little edges where the wire had been had scraped the paint off. Yes, that was an issue. So what I did is I rubbed these down with sandpaper and then gave them a third coat of primer, and we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do now, and I'll do this off camera because you've seen enough video shots of me sanding things. I'm going to sand these. So I've got some 400 grit sandpaper because it's what the can says to use. I'm going to sand it back, not a lot, just a bit, just to kind of take the shine off it, I suppose. I'm going to be really careful around the brass parts because that's the bit in particular that probably is most likely to fail. But I'm going to sand it back, and then I'll be ready to go with the top coat.
So same again here. Spraying into all of the kind of fiddly nooks and crannies, the hard to get bits first, and only once I've got those do I then start spraying on the flatter surfaces, on the larger areas. Now I'm going fairly light with this first coat. I'm not going crazy with it. I'm then letting all the parts dry. The can says to do it for about 3 minutes. It's not for very long. So I'm letting all the parts dry and then going in again with another coat. So you only actually see me here do the first coat on all those parts, but I do go in again with a second coat to kind of bulk it up. It's that second coat where I'm really going a bit heavier. Again, I don't want the paint to run or anything, but that's where I really start to bulk up a lot of that kind of volume. So next up's demasking all of the parts. I'm really careful here not to catch anything with a knife, although even then I do manage to accidentally go a bit too overboard with a knife here and there and catch some of my fresh paintwork. But all I'm doing is just removing all the masking tape. Now before I did this, bringing it home, so the last footage was actually taken at work. I work at a school, and so I did a lot of the painting actually with the DT department. So on the way home I did find that some of the paintwork had got damaged, so I did go in again and do a few little light sprays here and there. It was mostly where parts had been resting on the drying rack that the paint had obviously then peeled off where it had contacted that drying rack, but there were a few bits. I brought it home in a bag for life, which is probably a silly idea, and the straps had scraped some of the paintwork off, but again it never brought it back to metal. It was only coming back to primer, so it does seem to be well adhered, but yeah, I figured at this point I probably needed to give it a good touch up. Now once I've done the masking, again these parts were then left. I went on holiday, so they were left for about a week, and then they were then cured. So I went slow first of all with the curing, again in my 3D print enclosure,
this time up to about 40 degrees for a couple of hours. And again, after that, it definitely felt tougher. So every time it has a heat treatment, it comes out feeling that little bit tougher, ready for the final big oven cure, which we'll see in just a second. So to cure this paint, you're supposed to run the engine. This is engine paint after all. Naturally, I can't do that because I'm not using it on an engine. And so I had to cure it another way. Now online I found a recommendation that said that you could heat this to 90 degrees and leave it there for about an hour, and that will effectively do the same job. So here I'm putting it into the oven. Now before you panic, this isn't, although it is a domestic oven, this is actually a spare oven. Weirdly, when we bought the house it had two, so this one literally sits there idle, and I figured by the time we actually do ever use it again, any solvents would have dissipated. Now what I did notice is that there were a few, after, I don't know, about half hour, there were a few wet patches appearing. So I did open up and run a Q-tip over the parts, just to get rid of some of that moisture. This actually happened twice in total. The second time was nowhere near as severe, but I didn't want to risk that moisture in any way affecting the finish on the paint. So I did go in and clean that up.
Okay, so that's it, oven baked, and it's come out pretty well. I'm still not 100% convinced, because it does seem to leave fingerprint smudges, although it's not in the paint. I think it's just the oils of my fingers sort of showing, because it does wipe off. So I don't know, not convinced. But I'm going to run with it. It should be fully cured, so we'll just see at this point. There were a few little chips that have appeared with handling. So obviously you can see like a few little ones. That is likely to happen, I suppose, on the corners to a degree. So I'm not judging it too heavily for that. I did always say that these tires might fully chip back, but we'll just have to look. There were a few little things. So here, and again on the other side, that was where the frame was upside down, sat on the fire brick in the oven. So that's not the paint's fault. That's just the setup's fault. So I might need to touch that up a little bit at some point. I'll probably do that with some brush on paint. What else? There's a little here, which come back to primer. So there are bits. There's little dinks around somewhere on the wheel set where there you go. Again, where it was resting on the fire brick, it's left a little bit. So yeah, we'll see. So there are a couple of jobs. The next job then is to take. I've already done it on the rear set, but I've got to take a blade and sort out these contact surfaces. Now this was silly. I should have masking taped this. Really, I only noticed this just before I started spraying the primer, because obviously it's got to slide against this. So half of this face is steel and half of it is brass. So I need to scrape that back because obviously that's a sliding surface. So I've already done it with these ones. So I just take a razor blade and then scrape across it. It comes out reasonably well. Fortunately, it takes a bit of effort, not loads, but a little bit of effort, which is a bit reassuring, I suppose, considering it's fully cured paint. So it is fairly sturdy, even when I'm attacking it with a blade. But yeah, so let's have a sped up version of me finishing off those.
And with those jobs done, it's time to start reassembling things. So I sort of start working my way around and putting bits back together. I did, for one or two of the holes, I did chase the threads just with a tap by hand, because there were a couple that were just giving me a bit of grief, but mostly they went in as they were. I had at one point considered trying to mask all of the screw holes, and luckily I was talked out of it, which I'm very pleased about. So here is the lubricator go back on. Now I made the decision not to paint the lubricator. So there are a few bits that I left in the original paintwork. I quite liked the old beat up look of the lubricator, although I'm going for quite a clean effect with this loco. I did want to have something of the old loco kind of paintwork left behind. So yeah, I left that, and again the water pump things, because that's not going to be visible, I've left that as well. Next on then, the buffer beam that I made last video. I did follow my granddad's trick here that he told me about. So he told me to shove a small piece of wood into some of the holes in order to push the screw slightly up or slightly down. So I did do that. I'm sure, I think I mentioned it later in this video as well, just to even out those screw holes, and I ended up really happy with how that came out. It looks really cool. And here it is. So frames repainted, buffer beams back on, lubricators back on. I will, in time, obviously put back some of the motion. Here's what we got. It's pretty good. When I was sanding it back, though, some of the kind of dust was on my finger, and that has marked the surface, which is concerning. I've brushed to that, and it's not gone away. I've yet to try, using a bit of rubbing alcohol or something. I'm a bit concerned it might attack the paint. It shouldn't do, because it should be fully cured, but I don't know, I am worried. And I did accidentally dink it I was brushing it off with a paintbrush, and I did dink it somewhere. I can't remember where it was, and it left again, took back the top coats of the primer. So I'm not convinced by the sturdiness of the paint, but we will see. We'll see how it lasts in the long run. It certainly looks smart. Comparing it to what it did look like when I got it, it's a huge sort of glow up, I suppose. If I put the boiler on, we can start to see what it will look like. I'm trying to be careful, one-handed, and the smoke box, of course. It's looking nice. It's looking very nice. When I was reassembling it, I did shove some little bits of wood into this one, the hole here, to force this down a little bit. Force this up a little bit. And on this one, I've put a bit in the top to force it down a little bit. So that has actually evened out the issue that I had before with with these not looking level. They're still not perfect, but they're pretty good. So I'm much happier with that now. Yeah, I think this is looking really nice. I am actually pleased with it. Even if I don't manage to get it to run, hopefully I will, but if I don't, it certainly will be a very nice static model. But still, let's try and get it to run.